Yeah. Hi everyone. Yeah, look, we're going to have a look at the hotel proprietors. Sorry, we're going to have a look at the Hotel Proprietors Act. Obviously, very important. In addition to occupiers' liability and negligence related duties for anyone in the hospitality sector. The Act dates back to 1963. We're going to look fairly closely at the sections and highlight a few issues around the wording of particular parts of sections that will tie in with what you'll have already looked at in terms of negligence and occupiers' liability, in terms of reasonable care, that type of duty. But first off, there's one or two definitions. So, under the Act, a hotel is defined as an establishment that provides or holds itself out, providing sleeping accommodation, food, and drink for reward, i.e., for money, for all comers without special contract, and includes every establishment registered in the Register of Hotels under Tourist Traffic Act. So, a hotel, we have a pretty good idea what a hotel is. And then the proprietor is the person carrying on the business of the hotel, um, named on the register if it's on the register, of course. Um, so there too, I suppose, basic enough definitions as regards the hotel and the proprietor, but useful in terms of the actual title of the act itself. Uh, so moving on then, section 3 deals with the duty to receive guests. So the proprietor, hope I don't have to say it too many times, is under a duty to receive guests. Okay, and subject to the terms of the contract, the proprietor is under a duty to provide the accommodation, food, and drink um, at the time. So the only way then you really can refuse people is you have to have reasonable grounds of refusal. And as you can imagine from looking at this test of reasonableness in other areas already, it's a matter of usually for the court to decide what's reasonable or not. So I would suggest you'd have to have pretty good grounds um, to refuse a guest, but it could be that simply you're full. Might be a reasonable ground. So um, uh, just bear that in mind. Though I suppose if you have room and so on, then you are under a duty to receive guests. Section 4 then deals with the safety of guests. So your guest is there. Then the proprietor will have a duty to take reasonable care of the guest. Okay, this relates to the premises and that they are safe, as so far as reasonable care and skill can make them. So I've added the underlines there. So essentially, then your duty to take reasonable care is similar to the duty of negligence, and as you'll see, it specifically says it's independent to any liability of the proprietor as occupier of the premises under the Occupiers Liability Act. But under the Occupiers Liability Act, you're generally uh, under a duty to take reasonable care as regards the premises. Um, so, um, as you know, they're similar, but as I said, you just look at that first part again. Duty to take reasonable care of the person of the guest, and then um, the premises are to be as safe as reasonable care and skill can make them. So they're two important aspects of the safety of your guests. Section 5, there's a duty to receive property. So again, if sleeping accommodation is part of the package, if you like, for the guest, then the proprietor has the duty to receive that property, which I presume is like luggage and so on, um, for that person. And the liability here applies to property brought to the hotel, which the person's entitled to have there during their stay or during a reasonable period before or after. The liability then regards the property, and the proprietor will be liable for any damage or loss or destruction of property received by him or her. But just the wording usually says him, but it means him or her, from that person or from some other person on their behalf. Motor vehicles would be deemed to have been received where it is within the premises of the hotel, in the hotel garage, car park, or other premises. Now, as no doubt you are aware, you're usually going to have a sign disclaiming liability for anything that happens to people in motor vehicles and so on, like on the entrance to the underground car park or something. But we'll come back to that idea of disclaimers towards the end of the PowerPoint. Um, so this liability in Section 6 won't apply to a motor vehicle or any property left unless the proprietor or some servant of his or apparently servant authorized on his behalf um, has been notified that the motor vehicle has been brought into the hotel. So, that's going to include the curtilage of the hotel, as in the garage, car park, forecourt, that sort of thing. Um, so the scope of Section 6 then, the liability will only apply where the damage, loss, or destruction occurs during the stay um, or during the reasonable time before or after. The liability extends to property which the proprietor of the hotel takes charge, whether at the hotel or outside it during the time or period, and the proprietor is exempt from liability to the extent that the damage, loss, or destruction was due to unforeseeable or irresistible acts of nature, acts of war, kind of similar along the lines of force majeure here, kind of act of God. If lightning strikes the car while it's out there, how is that the hotel proprietor's fault? Or if it's a loss that is actually caused by the guests themselves or their accompanying person or somebody visiting them or so on. So, a person could just drive in and crash into a tree or a wall because they're not looking where they're going, for example. Section 7 says that where the proprietor of the hotel is liable under Section 6, the liability to any one person will not exceed £100, as in old Irish pounds. So it'll be the euro equivalent of that at this stage, except where the property was damaged, lost, stolen, or destroyed through the wrongful act, default, or omission of the proprietor. So, again, if it's a deliberate or wrongful act on behalf of the proprietor or a servant, then this £100 limit isn't going to apply. Okay. Or if the property was deposited on behalf of the guest for safe keeping with the proprietor or someone working for them, and it was kept in, for example, a safe or deposit box or something like that, then that might be different to, say, property just left in a room. And again, there's an issue as to whether or not the property was offered for safekeeping and the proprietor or their employees, if you like, or servants refused to accept it. Or, for example, refused to accept it because they weren't able to provide the service. Subsection 2 of Section 7 then says the limitation of liability will not apply to motor vehicles, so they're £100. And 3 says the proprietor is not entitled to protection of subsection 1 unless, at the time when the property was brought to a hotel, a copy of the notice set out in the first schedule to the Act in plain type is in a conspicuous place where it could be read by the guest, so at the reception desk or the main entrance. Okay, so that's typically if you're going to have some sort of limiting your liability, and that you're going to have that sign somewhere where someone will see it on their way in or at the reception. Section 8 says proprietor has a lien on property brought to the hotel by or on behalf of a guest as regards money owed, debts due, basically money owed. So you have property in the safe and this person hasn't paid for their room or hasn't paid for their food or drinks or something, you have a lien, L-I-E-N, and a lien is a right to hold on to property until a debt is paid. This lien extends to property which does not belong to the guest only if the proprietor was unaware of the fact that when he received the property, it wasn't belong to the guest. The proprietor may sell by public option the property to which the lien extends if after 6 weeks the debt isn't paid, and the proprietor shall pay to the person of whose property was brought to the hotel any excess or surplus of the proceeds of the sale minus the amount of the debt. So, the property is worth €1,000 and you're owed 600 for the room and um, uh, food and drink or something. So, you sell it and you get 1,000, then the person gets 400 back and you keep the 600 you're owed. I would expect in practice that people don't want to in the hotel industry don't really want to exercise these rights, but it's probably a very good threat, and I would think in practice probably going to be a last resort, because you don't want to obviously go down those lines with your guests. So it's still good to know that this is good leverage, if nothing else. Section 9 says any notice or agreement to limit or exclude any liability under the Act would be void. So, in other words, you can't put up a sign saying you're staying here and you're not subject to the Hotel Proprietors Act. You will. And if you want to check any of the sections or any of the schedules or so on, then there's a link there to probably section 7, but you can scroll up or down. So on irishstatutebook.ie, you'll find the 1963 Act and you can have a look through the various sections if needs be for future reference.